Mark Zuckerberg was on the Hill yesterday. So Mark Zuckerberg had been called onto the Hill yesterday because of all of the claims that privacy had been violated by Facebook. That if you publicly post information and then that information was scraped by an outside company, meaning that they were using that data in order to market to you or in order to generate voter profiles, for example, by Cambridge Analytica, that this was some sort of terrible, evil crime. Now, I think there are lots of problems with social media. I really do. I've been highly critical of social media many times, and I will be again in just a moment. But if you really think that the big problem on Facebook is that you publicly post information and then companies look at it, you're stupid. Okay, you're dumb. And if you think the big problem on Facebook is that tons of people were being manipulated by fake news, if you really think, like Democrats think, that Hillary Clinton would have won except for the 7 ads run by Russian bots in the 2016 election, you crazy. Okay, you're out of your mind. And people are so crazy now that there was a big story that came out, I think it was from NBC News yesterday, about a video that was viewed about 250,000 times that was a supposed sex tape, including Hillary Clinton. Okay, it was fake news, obviously, because number one, who would ever want to see any of that on camera? But number two, is that really, was that shifting votes? Because we're 5 minutes away from Dianne Feinstein calling the head of Pornhub up to the Hill to explain why Hillary Clinton lost since there was a distribution on Pornhub of a fake Hillary Clinton sex tape. Okay, all of this is nonsense. The real problems with social media is that social media are now playing a gatekeeper function they were not meant to play. Social media were supposed to be like your phone line. They were supposed to be a platform. Okay, here's the way that this works. When you pick up the phone and you call somebody, what is said over that phone line is not the responsibility of Verizon or AT&T or Sprint, okay? It is the responsibility of the person on the phone. Facebook was supposed to be more like the phone line. It was just a platform. You put your information up there, you put your news stories up there, people can engage, they cannot engage, it's their free choice. Instead, Facebook has now interposed itself between its own users and information that people want to see. It's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time. They were doing it back in 2016 when they were talking about shifting their algorithms so that certain trending topics were not allowed to trend. Conservative trending topics were not allowed to trend on Facebook. And now, of course, they've shifted their algorithms to supposedly benefit local news and established mainstream media outlets and against alternative news sources like Daily Wire. Right? This is why, if you're watching this show right now and you're wondering where your Daily Wire updates went, you need to go and check out your own settings right now and reset your settings because Facebook has tacitly and without your permission gone and changed the algorithm so that you are not seeing our updates anymore because they say that our news site is somehow not as credible as CNN or the New York Times, which is just absurd. Okay, Facebook right now is even burying which outlets it's punishing. Right, so Facebook is obviously penalizing certain outlets, but it's not explaining what exactly it's penalizing. According to the tech website The Outline, conservative and right-wing publishers were hit hardest by the new algorithm change. The engagement numbers of most predominantly liberal publishers remained unaffected. And now Peter Hasson of the Daily Caller is reporting that Facebook does not intend to identify which media outlets it helps and which it hurts, according to a company spokesperson who spoke to the Daily Caller News Foundation. The spokesperson argued that if the company revealed that data, it would not give people a clear picture of Facebook, adding, "We've made changes to newsfeed to help people meaningfully connect with friends and family first. This means public pages of all types are going to experience declines across Facebook. Political pages and partisan news pages, like other public pages, have experienced declines, but there are examples of declines across the political spectrum." Except for the fact that that's not true. Okay, except for the fact that if you look at the mainstream media outlets, they have not lost engagement, right? The only sites that are losing engagement are particularly conservative ones. So all of the senators yesterday were grilling Mark Zuckerberg on the Hill. They're grilling him again today. And first of all, it is important to note, if you're going to have people grill Mark Zuckerberg, they have to have once used a computer. Okay? A lot of these questions look like they were submitted by my 93-year-old grandmother. And it was a bunch of people who are asking Mark Zuckerberg about the questions. Basically, the exchange sounded something like this: Senator Orrin Hatch, who's 8,000 years old, either reading off a piece of paper written by a 23-year-old, or asking questions that have nothing to do with Facebook, or Senator Dick Durbin, who's a complete idiot who probably has never used Facebook, sitting there and saying, "So, Mark Zuckerberg, you have a book full of faces," and then Mark Zuckerberg looking at him in wonderment and bemusement. This is what happens when the average age of the senators who are questioning Mark Zuckerberg is 57 years old. That's not a rip on people who are 57. It is to say that the chances that they are really fluent in social media is pretty low. And that's why you see stupidities like Dick Durbin asking Mark Zuckerberg where he stayed at his hotel last night. This is a thing that actually happened.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No. Okay, and this is one of the things that's so incredibly stupid. So one of the complaints by Democrats has been that if you publicly post information, then people see that information, it's a violation of privacy. Mark Zuckerberg would not have to, under Facebook's rule, reveal where he went to his hotel last night. And so I'm not sure what Dick Durbin is even getting at, but Dick Durbin doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. There were a couple of people who actually went after Zuckerberg on matters that actually do matter. Okay, so there are really a couple of matters that are really serious. One is the amount of political bias at Facebook, the political bias of the people who are actually implementing and writing the algorithms. And the other thing that's really important is whether Facebook is a platform or whether Facebook is a publisher. And that matters because, getting back to our AT&T, Sprint, Verizon discussion, if the phone company starts acting like a censor, if they start buzzing out what you're saying to your friends, they become responsible for what you say to your friends. They're acting like a publisher. Like we at Daily Wire, we edit all of our pieces. We purchase all of our photos from a service called Getty Images so that they're all licensed because we're a publisher and we're responsible for the content we post. If, however, if we use a particular internet service, that internet service is not responsible for the content we post. It's just a platform. Facebook has presented itself as a platform, which means they're not legally responsible for example, misuse of copyrighted content or slander. But if they're responsible for what's being put up, if they're controlling what you see and what you hear, then suddenly they need to be treated like any other news outlet. They need to be treated like NBC or MSNBC or CBS or CNN or the New York Times or the Daily Wire. Right? So those were two separate questions. One was the political bias, and one was the fact that Facebook is playing censor, which would actually subject them to liability. Both of these lines of questioning were engaged in by Republicans, and these were the only two lines of questioning that mattered. So the first line of questioning about the political bias, about Facebook cracking down on conservatives, this was pushed by Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. Full disclosure, when Senator Cruz visited our offices and I interviewed him, we had a pretty substantial discussion about exactly this topic. So good for Senator Cruz for going after Mark Zuckerberg on this. Here's Senator Cruz illuminating the issue for Zuckerberg.
Well, Mr. Zuckerberg, I will say there are a great many Americans who I think are deeply concerned that Facebook and other tech companies are engaged in a pervasive pattern of bias and political censorship. There have been numerous instances with Facebook. In May of 2016, Gizmodo reported that Facebook had purposely and routinely suppressed conservative stories from trending news, including stories about CPAC, including stories about Mitt Romney, including stories about the Lois Lerner IRS scandal, including stories about Glenn Beck. In addition to that, Facebook has initially shut down the Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day page, has blocked a post of a Fox News reporter, has blocked over 24 Catholic pages, and most recently blocked Trump supporters Diamond and Silk's page with 1.2 million Facebook followers after determining their content and brand were, quote, unsafe to the community. To a great many Americans, that appears to be a pervasive pattern of political bias. Do you agree with that assessment?
Zuckerberg would go on to basically say that it is fair to say that Silicon Valley is far left-leaning and that suspicions of political bias are not unwarranted. So he basically admitted that. So that's important. Also, it is important to note, along the same lines, that Zuckerberg, who is now proclaiming that Facebook ought to be the arbiter of what constitutes good speech and bad speech, can't define what good speech and bad speech are. So he was questioned by Ben Sasse about specifically this, and he was asked about defining hate speech because he said, well, let's just get rid of all hate speech. Let's get rid of all the bad speech. And Sasse said, okay, well, it's one thing if you're talking about violent speech, but if you're talking about nonviolent speech, do you even know how to define that? And if you claim that you're a platform, if you claim that you're not a publisher, you're a platform, then how can you define what speech is hateful and which speech is not, given the fact that you have no hard considerations as to what that constitutes? So Senator Cruz ripped Zuckerberg up and down on his level of political bias at Facebook, which is well worthwhile. And then Zuckerberg is questioned about how he's policing speech, because this is really the danger. And this is what Democrats want. You have to understand, the entire Democratic crusade against the so-called privacy violations of Facebook is really an attempt by Democrats to grab control of the reins at Facebook and drive Facebook to please them politically. Right? The implicit promise here is that if Facebook starts mirroring all the Democratic talking points, then they will stop regulating them or threatening to do so. That's what they're talking about. That's really what all this is about. And Zuckerberg already has leanings in that direction, right? Zuckerberg's a lefty. He's a Democrat. And he's already talked about how he wants to stop hate speech on his platform. But as is obvious, he has no idea how to define hate speech because there is no way to define hate speech in any real way.
You may decide, or Facebook may decide, it needs to police a whole bunch of speech that I think America might be better off not having policed by one company that has a really big and powerful platform. Can you define hate speech?
Senator, I think that this is a really hard question. And I think it's one of the reasons why we struggle with it. There are certain definitions that we have around calling for violence or
let's just agree on that. If somebody's calling for violence, that shouldn't be there.
Okay, so again, there is a difference between saying you're going to ban speech that calls for violence and saying you're going to ban hate speech. Zuckerberg has no idea what he's talking about. He says that AI is going to be able to identify hate speech. That's nonsense. Okay, what we're talking about here is social media platforms acting as censors. And that's really the point. Okay, Zuckerberg made a pretty shocking admission in the middle of this colloquy with the Republican senators. He was asked specifically, are you a platform or are you a publisher? And he basically admits we're a publisher.
You agree now that Facebook and other social media platforms are not neutral platforms, but bear some responsibility for the content.
I agree that we're responsible for the content.
Okay, so as soon as he says that, his lawyers in Silicon Valley lose their minds. Because he just acknowledged that Facebook now ought to be treated like Daily Wire or the New York Times, meaning that any unlicensed photo shared on Facebook makes Facebook suable. It means that any piece of slander published on Facebook makes Facebook suable. Okay, this is the choice Mark Zuckerberg has, and he's going to have to make it. Are you a platform, or are you in fact a publisher? And Dan Sullivan, the senator from Alaska, he says he asked Zuckerberg the same question. You'll see Zuckerberg start to back off because there was a little break in the questioning. I'm sure he got a call from his lawyer saying, Mark, you need to back off that one real quick. So here's Dan Sullivan questioning Zuckerberg.
When you mentioned to Senator Cornyn, you said you are responsible for your content. So which are you? Are you a tech company or are you the world's largest publisher? Because I think that goes to a really important question on what form of regulation or government action, if any, you would take.
Senator, this is a really big question. I view us as a tech company because the primary thing that we do is build technology and products.
But you said you're responsible for your content, which makes you kind of a publisher, right?
Well, I agree that we're responsible for the content, but we don't produce the content. I think that when people ask us if we're a media company or a publisher, my understanding of what the heart of what they're really getting at is, do we feel a responsibility for the content on our platform? The answer to that, I think, is clearly yes. But I don't think that that's incompatible with fundamentally at our core being a technology company where the main thing that we do is have engineers and build products. Man, his lawyers have got to just be twisting themselves in pretzels over all of this because he just opened up Facebook to millions of dollars in liability. Right? Here's the way it works now. If you're a photographer and some idiot in Utah posts your photo without paying you, without licensing it, normally you'd have to sue the idiot in Utah. You couldn't sue Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg just said we feel responsibility for the content that's posted on Facebook, which means that you can now sue Facebook. Okay, Facebook is a much deeper pocket. Under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, there's an automatic statutory penalty for unlicensed use of materials like that ranges from $750 per instance to $30,000 per instance. How many unlicensed photos are posted on Facebook every minute? I mean, my goodness, if his lawyers are not in a state of panic right now, then they really should be, because I promise you the lawsuits are forthcoming, and they are forthcoming in pretty short order. It's amazing. But this is where the Democrats have driven Zuckerberg. And when you decide to go full leftist and censor your own content and censor content of other people because you want to please your cocktail party friends, that has some pretty significant ramifications for your business as well. Okay.